Okay, so if you spend any time, scrolling online or just listening these days, you're absolutely swimming in mental health terms.
Oh, definitely. It's everywhere.
And we throw around words like stress, anxiety, depression almost constantly. Often, I think we use them like they mean the same thing, just, a general bad feeling.
Right, they get blurred together. But scientifically, psychologically, they really are quite distinct emotional states.
Exactly. And that blurriness, well, it creates this real information overload. So the question is, how do you get past that blur? How do you actually start to untangle these, incredibly common experiences?
Yeah, that's precisely what we wanted to tackle for you today. We did a deep dive into one specific tool. It's a highly structured self-report instrument designed exactly for that purpose, making clear distinctions between these three states. Which tool is that?
We focused entirely on the depression, anxiety, and stress scale, the 21 items version. Most
Yeah.
people just call it the DASS21.
Ah, the DASS21. Okay. Yeah. And it's basically a very targeted set of three independent scales. They're designed purely to measure the intensity of depression, anxiety, and stress, sort of right now in the present moment.
And I really like how efficient it is.
Yeah.
It's not like this huge battery of tests, right? It's just 21 statements.
21 total. Quick, super quick. And the user just rates how much each one applied to them over the past week. The scale itself is beautifully simple, too. 0 is didn't apply at all. 3 is applied very much or most of the time.
So yeah, 21 questions. It's fast. It seems really clear. And it gives you this snapshot of the last 7 days that, well, it tries to be diagnostically specific without actually giving a diagnosis.
And that efficiency, it comes from very focused design. The DASS21, it's made up of 3 totally distinct scales, and each one has exactly 7 items, just 7.
7 for each. Okay.
Yeah, this really rigid structure forces that clear differentiation based on specific symptom clusters, things that, maybe broader scales in the past kind of muddled together.
Okay, let's unpack those symptom clusters then. Maybe start with the depression scale. It's labeled D, right?
Correct, D.
So when we look at those 7 items, what are they really getting at? It feels like it's deeper than just, feeling sad.
It is. The D scale is really designed to assess these core features of what we'd call low positive affect. So that includes dysphoria, that general sort of unease or dissatisfaction,
Right.
hopelessness, self-deprecation, and crucially, anhedonia.
Anhedonia. Can we break that down a bit for the listener?
Sure. Anhedonia is essentially the decreased ability to feel pleasure or interest, even in things that, used to bring you joy. The focus here is really internal withdrawal, a lack of forward momentum.
That lack of momentum, the inertia you mentioned, that really jumps out when you look at the actual item.
Yeah. You see things like item 21, feeling that life was meaningless, or item 5, finding it difficult to work up the initiative to do things.
Exactly. It really captures that feeling of, emotional and almost physical paralysis that seems to define depression in this framework. It's a real contrast to the kind of energy you see in the other scales.
Right.
It absolutely nails that classic depressive profile.
Yeah.
The feeling that the world's gone dim combined with just not being able to start things, even when you know you should.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's depression. Now, if we pivot to the anxiety scale, the A scale, wow, the focus shifts completely. It feels much more outward, more physical, right?
It certainly does, yeah. What depression is about that internal lack of positive feeling. Anxiety here is all about physical alarm signals.
Fight or flight stuff.
Pretty much. This scale really hones in on assessing autonomic arousal, your body's automatic responses and also skeletal muscle effects. It really is about the body taking over. And what's particularly useful about the DASS21 anxiety scale, I think, is how much it focuses on those physiological symptoms. That helps separate it from just generalized worry, which might be more in your head, but not necessarily felt physically in the same way. I mean, it does include items on situational anxiety and the subjective feeling of being anxious, yes, but the key differentiators are often those really tangible physical things.
And that makes those items so specific, doesn't it? We're not just talking about, I felt worried. We're seeing specific markers like item 2, awareness of dryness of the mouth.
Yep. Or item 7, experiencing tremoling. And I think my favorite example, just for sheer specificity, is item 19. Being aware of the action of the heart in the absence of physical exertion.
Right.
That heart-pounding feeling when you're just sitting still.
Exactly. That level of detail really shows how the scale is trying to capture the physical side of panic and acute distress. Okay, so if anxiety is that acute physical alarm, that brings us to the third one. The stress scale. S. This one can be tricky. How does the DASS21 manage to carve out stress as something distinct from both that depressive inertia and that acute anxiety? Well, the way it's defined here is through chronic nonspecific arousal. So this isn't the specific panic or the heart palpitations of the A scale. This is more like that persistent, simmering state of burnout and nervous energy.
Oh, okay. Chronic arousal.
Yeah. The stress scale assesses things like difficulty relaxing, general nervous arousal, being easily agitated, and maybe most revealingly, irritability, overreactiveness, and patience.
That's interesting. So the stress items tap into more emotional volatility and intolerance.
Exactly. Look at the phrasing. Item 1. I found it hard to wind down.
Mm-hmm.
Can't switch off. Right? Or item 6. I tended to overreact to situations. These really capture that chronic state where your nervous system just feels like it never gets a break. You're just on edge, constantly keyed up. Yeah.
And that idea of intolerance is perfectly caught in item 14. I was intolerant of anything that kept me from getting on with what I was doing. Ah, yes, that feeling.
That is pure chronic frustrated arousal, isn't it? That feeling of being perpetually wound up and just annoyed by tiny obstacles.
Yeah.
It's a really clear indicator of a high stress load, and it feels completely separate from the depressive can't act feeling or the anxious physical terror.
Okay, so we've established that DASS21 is really meticulous about separating these symptoms out.
Seems like it.
And this precision, it leads us to the sort of core idea behind the whole instrument. This separation comes from how the developers viewed psychological difficulty itself, which is fundamentally dimensional, not categorical.
Okay, let's really unpack this dimensional idea for you, the listener, because this feels like the key philosophical insight here.
It really is.
The basic assumption is that the differences between people who are considered normal and those in, say, clinical populations, those differences are essentially about degree. It's about how much you're experiencing something, not about being in a completely different category or kind of person.
Exactly. Think of it like temperature. Categorical models, like the ones often used in big diagnostic manuals like the DSM or ICD, they try to decide, are you sick, like having a fever, or are you, well, normal temperature? It's a yes-no box.
Right.
It's often a checklist approach. Meet X number of criteria and you fit into this category. But the DASS21 works differently. It assumes we all have some level of stress, anxiety, and depression. It's just interested in measuring the exact intensity or the depth of those feelings along a continuum, like a thermometer measures degrees.
Precisely. Just like a thermometer measures degrees. That makes it incredibly relevant for just everyday life, doesn't it? It means whether you're, I don't know, stressed about a presentation or dealing with something much heavier like grief, you exist somewhere on these three lines, these continuums. This scale just measures how far along that line you've been pushed by whatever's going on for you right now. And the really crucial implication of that dimensional approach is this. Because it measures intensity, the DASS21 isn't actually designed to give you a formal clinical diagnosis based on those rigid classifications like the DSM. It can't put you in a box.
It can't allocate you to a discrete diagnostic category. It is purely a measurement tool. It assesses the severity and intensity of your current emotional symptoms. It helps maybe a professional distinguish whether someone's primary distress is being driven by, say, that autonomic anxiety or the heart racing, or by chronic stress, the agitation and irritability. So it provides numbers, actual data on what feels like a very subjective internal experience. Which brings us to the practical side, the scoring. How do we actually turn these ratings on the 21 items into a result that tells us the intensity of D, A, and S? Okay, it's actually quite straightforward. There are two main steps. First, you calculate 3 separate raw scores, one for depression, one for anxiety, one for stress. Okay. You just sum up the scores 0, 1, 2, or 3 for the 7 items that belong to each specific scale.
Got it. So each raw score could range from 0, if you circled 0 for all 7 items in that scale.
Right.
Up to 21 if you circled 3, applied very much for all 7.
Correct. And now here's the slightly unusual but really important step, because the DASS21 is actually a short version of an older, longer 42-item scale.
Oh, okay.
The raw scores you just calculated for the DASS21 must then be multiplied by 2.
Multiply by 2. Why is that?
This scaling is just a critical step. It allows the scores from this shorter 21-item questionnaire to roughly approximate the score you would have gotten from the original, longer 42-item version. It makes the results comparable.
Okay, that makes sense. Multiply by 2 to get the final score, so that final score could potentially range up to 42 for each scale then.
Exactly, up to 42 for D, A, and S.
And having that final score makes it easily comparable, like you said, across different studies or clinical contexts. So once we have these final multiplied scores, how do we interpret them? How do we know what the number actually means in terms of severity? This is where the thresholds come in, I assume.
Yeah.
So the final scores are then typically categorized using 5 conventional severity labels: normal, mild, moderate, severe, and extremely severe.
Okay.
And these labels, they aren't just arbitrary. They're based on quite extensive research comparing DASS scores in normal populations versus clinical ones, so they provide pretty clear numerical boundaries.
And these numerical boundaries, the cutoffs, they vary quite a bit depending on whether we're talking depression, anxiety, or stress, right? Which reflects how differently these states manifest.
Precisely. For depression, for example, a score of 0 to 9 is considered in the normal range.
Okay.
But extremely severe doesn't start until you hit a score of 28 or more.
28 plus, got it. What about anxiety?
Well, in contrast, the thresholds for anxiety are much tighter. A normal anxiety score is only 0 to 7.
Lower.
Much lower. And extremely severe begins much earlier at a score of 20 or higher.
Wow, only 20 for extremely severe anxiety versus 28 for depression. Why such a big difference?
Well, it likely reflects that intense anxiety symptoms, especially the physical ones, the scale measures, tend to be more acute. They're maybe less commonly experienced at really high levels continuously in the general population compared to depressive symptoms. So the body's threshold for what constitutes significant physically manifesting anxiety seems to be lower according to this scale's calibration.
That's fascinating in itself. It takes a much lower numerical score to register as severe anxiety than severe depression or stress.
Okay. And finally, what about stress?
For stress, the normal range is actually the widest. It goes from 0 up to 14.
Okay, quite broad.
Yeah. But then extremely severe is reserved for scores way up at 34 and above.
34 plus, okay.
So this structure with the different thresholds, it's like a phenomenal shortcut to understanding, really. It allows anyone using it or a professional interpreting it to quickly grasp not just the overall severity, but the specific profile of distress.
Yeah, you could see how, for example, someone might score, say, 25 on anxiety, which is extremely severe.
Right. But maybe only 15 on stress, which is just moderate, almost normal.
Exactly. And that specific profile immediately suggests, okay, this person is likely dealing with acute panic, significant physiological distress, maybe without that accompanying chronic burnout or constant agitation that characterizes the stress scale.
It's a really powerful informational tool then. It provides quantitative clarity on what feels very subjective.
Yeah.
And it forces us maybe to be more precise in how we talk about and assess these feelings. But there's a big but, isn't there? We absolutely have to talk about the mandatory clinical context. This is built right into the source material, and it feels crucial.
Absolutely vital, yes. The source material, the manual for the DASS21, is very explicit about this. While the scale is brilliant for assessment and tracking changes,
That's not a diagnosis.
it should not be used as a replacement for a proper face-to-face clinical interview or a professional diagnosis, full stop.
Yeah, we really have to emphasize that directive from the source itself. This is an assessment aid. If you, the listener, or anyone using this tool, finds they're scoring high, especially getting into those severe or extremely severe bands on any of the scales, the clear guidance is to contact a qualified professional. Talk to your GP, get a referral for a full clinical evaluation.
Absolutely. The tool is designed to provide specific information on the intensity of feelings, which can be incredibly helpful for guiding a conversation with a professional.
Yep.
But it is definitely not a diagnostic endpoint in itself.
Okay, good. Important caveat.
Yeah.
So maybe to just summarize our whole deep dive here, the DASS21 gives us this quick, very structured 21-item window into the dimensional intensity of depression, anxiety, and stress.
Right.
Intensity and differentiation.
Exactly. By grouping symptoms into those distinct clusters, like you said, the nervous energy and intolerance for stress versus the heart racing and dry mouth for anxiety versus the anhedonia and inertia for depression, it really does succeed in differentiating these three states based on their intensity and how they specifically manifest. It's a tool that I think requires a bit of nuance from its user, forces you to observe your own internal state with a bit more clarity.
It certainly makes you pause and rethink every time you just casually say, I'm stressed or I'm anxious.
And given how rigorously this scale distinguishes between that chronic stress arousal and the acute anxiety response using, awareness of your heart for one and difficulty winding down for the other, it does raise a really important question for you, the listener, maybe to explore further. When you feel overwhelmed, which specific symptoms are actually dominating your internal landscape? Is it primarily those somatic fight or flight effects that are characteristic of anxiety according to the scale? Or is it more the chronic arousal, the impatience, the difficulty relaxing that defines stress here?
Yeah, which pattern fits best? Exactly. Because the tool teaches us that those two states, even though we lump them together all the time, might need completely different responses, maybe even different clinical approaches. You can't really solve for the wrong problem, can you, if you take the time to look closely at the language it uses?